Ivy Valentine subscribes to Mark Yoon. So should you. Enjoy your treat!
I want to piggyback off of my last video and kind of go into the realistic expectations of what we should and can expect from Soul Calibur 7. And this goes into a bunch of different variables about like sales and past sales, DLC, all that stuff. But while I would like to put specific numbers down, the biggest problem that I've come into contact with when it comes to trying to discern profitability of Soul Calibur 6 is I keep running into the wall that is I don't know what the investors paid to put into the game to help support the budget. So it's pretty simple math to do. You can actually just take an average around the world price for Soul Calibur 6, the median price being like 30, the upper price being 50. Most places around the world have similar MSRPs. The United States, it was around 60. Canada, it's like 90 or something like that. So you just have to take those median prices. And not including any potential sales and subparing like collector's editions and things like that. When you take this all together, you come up with a pretty big number. The problem lies in not knowing what the investment costs up front were, because investment costs by financiers are the biggest part of these games. What you need to do is account for how much money they put in so you can kind of ascribe and find out how much money they're actually owed back. Because people and companies put up these money to make profit back. They want to make a return on investment, so they don't just want the bare minimum back of what they actually put in. They expect more, a certain percentage usually. And when publishers make money off of these games, they usually tend to have to pay back its debt first in order to start calculating profit, and that's where the financials come into a hard play. So I wanted to try and kind of figure out how much money it made hand over fist. That way we can kind of approximately determine profitability, and you can go from there to determine how much it would cost for the game, how much it would cost for financiers, and all that other stuff. Unfortunately, like without knowing that big piece of the puzzle, if you're talking about math, we would call that literally X, and if you can't solve for the thing you're trying to solve for, then there's just no way to do it, especially because we don't have digital sales on hand, because most places don't actually report digital sales. All we have is like our physical actual sales, and that was at the latest that we heard was like 2 million, which was like 2 years ago, almost 3 years ago at this point. So it's absurdly like low estimated. We can probably estimate that's at least 2.5 million, maybe even the upper echelon of 3 million at this point. Of course, they're not going to count sales or anything like that, but there's also a misconception when it comes to purchase prices too that I've seen going around. If somebody says that like, oh, Soul Calibur made this much money off of this sale, that's partially correct. If a game goes on sale, that doesn't count. That is not correct. So if you're going to talk about you're walking into a GameStop and you see that they're having a sale and they have new games, let's say 4 for $20, pre-owned, and we have new, you get like buy 2 get 1 free, and you would consider that a sale because the company would have to be paying less money for that game, right? Well, that's not exactly how it works. It usually goes by units shipped, because what happens is a company will purchase the games from the distributor at the retail price, the MSRP, and then they will ship those games to the retail locations like Walmart or Target or GameStop, something like that. And then whatever they do with the game after that is pretty much up to them, because the game's already accounted for sales-wise. The problem being that the company, the big box store that purchased those said games, that actually wants to make a profit off of those games, they kind of bite the bullet and spend the cover up front, and then it comes down to sales to being like, let's just move this product off of the floor because it's wasted inventory space, it's taking up room in the back, it's not selling or not moving. That way if we put it on sale, we're guaranteed to at least free up this inventory space, which it goes in terms of sales and profit anyway. When a company or a person is doing like the wall, let's say, if you go into a GameStop and you see how it's sectioned off into different sections, they have sales, potential sales attributed to those sections of the wall. So they will say, okay, this wall is worth this much, this wall is worth that much, and whatever goes on the floor is how much they're accruing or how much they expect to accrue from total sales or expected sales. And usually this is an underestimate. They do have an over echelon limit of which they actually place on it also, but they don't usually go with that because the expected number is usually at their lowest limit. And they do this based on quarter financials from the past financial fiscal year. and they take all those numbers into account and say this wall is worth this much, so this is what gets displayed there. Companies can also buy space on retail walls, such as when you see standees or when you see other things like that. That's usually extra money that's purchased for marketing potential, and that marketing potential leads to word of mouth, which leads to game sales and units sold. But that game, once it's in the actual big box store on the shelf, is pretty much already paid for. You're pretty much paying back the company that purchased the product so that they can actually make a profit off of what they purchased. Now, it is true that like if they're selling a game for, let's say, MSRP, let's say Soul Calibur 6 was $60, the company that purchases the units is not going to be paying $60 per unit. It's usually going to be much under that, so they can make so much of a profit, and especially the more bulk that a company purchases, they usually get bulk deals, which means that they're paying less per unit than they would sell per unit. So that's how everyone tries to make their money back, which does intend to work, because that's usually how retail works in general, especially when it comes to physical media. But going based on only physical media, this is just a long roundabout way to say it's almost impossible to talk about profit unless they release actual numbers, which most companies don't release. And like I said, the last thing that we got released was 2 million, almost 3 years ago. I think it's 3 years ago in December, so it's December now, so about 3 years ago. So we can almost automatically assume that they've purchased more. Now, if you're eliminating a distributor and somebody's ordering, let's say, directly from Bandai Namco's website, then that actually eliminates the middleman, and those aren't units shipped at that point until they're shipped to you. That's an actual individual sale, because they're not shipping this out to a retail big box store. But anything that's like secondhand that you would get from like eBay or Amazon or something akin to that, GameStop even, that is literally like already been purchased and you're paying that money back. So coming up with Soul Calibur 7's budget is pretty much an impossibility. We can only go based on saying generalities. Like we'll say, well, Soul Calibur 6, let's just assume that it sold 2.5 million copies, which if you think that's low, that's actually how much Soul Calibur 2 sold, which is the best-selling Soul Calibur game. So Soul Calibur 6 is up there with the best-selling game in the franchise, like according to the charts, the VGA charts. So when we're actually trying to talk about what the possibilities are, we're not going to talk about probability, because probability has to do with statistics, which has to do with math, and we don't have direct math to correlate with that. So we're going to go with probability, because we're not going to go with probability. We're just going to go with possibility, even though I don't understand how you can generally understand that something's possible in a scientific sense without having data. But we're going to just colloquially say that we're going to guess. Okay, that's the best way I can put that. And my approximation would be, if we sold 2.5 million copies and you're selling them at the lower echelon and you're going at like $30, let's say, per unit, then we can get, so even if we're just guesstimating that number at 2.5 million times $30, which is a lower echelon, and that's like $75 million right there. So if the game costs, let's say, like $30 million to actually make and produce, which I don't think that's how much it costs for Soul Calibur 6. It's probably on the lower tiered echelon of something along the lines of maybe The Witcher 3. So I'm saying anywhere in the ballpark of, 12 million to 15 million, maybe even 20 million. There's definitely like a lot of corners that were cut with Soul Calibur 6 because it was an application game. But paying back their investors, which would be the brunt of what that was, and marketing, and then paying all that stuff back, and then paying the devs what they're owed, and then paying employees and all this stuff afterwards. That's where you can see the net profit would be before taxes. So we would come out to say that if we can guess that this game sold 2.5 million copies so far, which I'm sure that's an undervalued estimate, it's probably far more than that, and they have the numbers for digital. Digital works a little bit different. The reason they don't release those numbers is because they have to actually pay platforms to host their games. So whether it's on Apple or Google Play or PlayStation or Xbox or anything like that, they need to pay licensing fees for their games, or distribution fees, I'm sorry, for those games to actually appear on those marketplaces and sell. So whatever they sell, the actual placeholder gets a percentage of those sales, which is why Microsoft's trying to do something with Game Pass, because even though it costs them billions of dollars every year to run that system, they don't have to really pay licensing fees for every individual title that they put on their store. They can charge just a licensing fee or a distribution fee to have Xbox Game Pass on whatever available device that they're allowed to have. So it gains more of a net profit for them. Soul Calibur 7 is definitely going to have a bigger budget than Soul Calibur 6, just based on the fact that Soul Calibur 6 had what we would know as a dismal budget. We all know the story. If you haven't seen it yet, go to my mini documentaries and watch Bumpy Road to Soul Calibur 6. You'll find out all the information that you have in there because I don't want to retread territory again. But if you're going to go based on sales from this game, and we say that 2.5 million is an undervalued estimate of what this game sold, then investors are going to look at that and they're going to look at their net profits that they made, and they're going to say, okay, so we're going to estimate that Soul Calibur 7 is going to sell at least 2.5 million copies. If not, we'll underestimate that back down to 2 million copies, and we're going to give you the budget based on that. Now, the budgets are different for different things, so marketing budget is always, they say that you spend about as much as you spend on production, on marketing. That's at least how it goes in Hollywood. Gaming is a little bit different than that because it travels a lot more different marketing places, such as esports tournaments, word of mouth, Twitch streamers, any kind of streamers on YouTube, stuff like that. That's all marketing that the companies don't necessarily have to pay for, and that's considered word of mouth marketing, which builds up the brunt of what they expect to sell their games at. So if they're going to take that and say Soul Calibur 7 is going to make at least 2 million copies, and by the way, the prediction for Soul Calibur 6 was at least 1 million copies by Bandai Namco. That's at least what they needed to do to pass their application game status to continue the series, which obviously they more than doubled. So they're going to estimate a low estimated number of it's going to sell equal to the lowest proportion of what the finalized total sales were, which would be 2 million copies, and they're going to go based off of that. So obviously Soul Calibur 7 is going to have a bigger budget than Soul Calibur 6. However, it's not going to be something titanic. Tekken, for example, is going to have a much bigger budget this go around because over time, the game came out in like 2017, but like over time, and that's the console release. It actually released in 2015 in arcades first and took a whopping like almost 2.5 years to come to console. But like I said again, over time it accrued, what, 10 million units sold or 11, something like that. I get them in Mortal Kombat mixed up all the time. But if you're going to talk about that, then they're going to put that money back to the investors, and how much profit they make back on that, they can actually predetermine their budget for their next title, which means Tekken's always going to be bigger than Soul Calibur at this point. They usually used to only sell between 3 million and 5 or 6 million copies, whereas Soul Calibur usually sells between 1 million and 3 million. The Tekken tag games obviously sell the same as Soul Calibur. They're the lowest selling ticket numbers of the Tekken games. But when it comes to Soul Calibur itself, we can expect arbitrary upgrades. Now, the only problem that would come into play with this is if they are planning to future-proof it by working on another generation hardware's engine, whether that be using like another physics engine as a plug-in for their regular engine, like they did with Soul Calibur 4, where they were running off of Unreal, but they used the Havok plug-in for physics only. That is a different story, and all of that requires licensing fees, title rights, distribution fees. There's all that stuff that goes into that, whether they need to build on a new engine or not. Then it costs the manpower to port those over, to enhance the polygonal structures, to up-resolution them to whatever they're going to up-res it to, whether it be 2K or 4K. Then they have to work out frame rate issues, and all of that stuff costs money. It's not cheap. I doubt they're going to stay on the same engine that they're working with now. They're probably going to continue paying Unreal and just upgrade to either Unreal Engine 4 or Unreal Engine 5. Hopefully it's Unreal Engine 5. That way it's just like a better experience. But if they do that or build their own in-house engine, that'll cost a lot of money. And then anything that goes on after that is all like we said before, building the actual game itself, taking prior assets, up-resing them, getting gameplay mechanics down, focus group testing, and then something else that people don't also get a lot of confused with is quality assurance. So quality assurance is not usually done in-house. There are specific quality assurance companies that actually have programmers and code writers and quality QA testers within them themselves that actually get these games, and they have to do a bunch of work to them, and those companies get paid a stipend from the actual company, and that gets split amongst the employees there too. And that's not coming out of a separate budget, that's part of the budget as well. So if you're ever playing a game that you feel like feels cheap and hasn't been tested, it probably hasn't been tested. And usually these days it seems that like they use a lot of us as the beta testers, for example, and they'll put out the game, sell it for full price, and they'll release patches over time based on feedback from the community. But I don't think Soul Calibur is going to go that route. They usually do QA test their stuff, so we'll see what happens with that. Anyway, this is all roundabout, really drawn out, long-winded, and boring, I'm sorry, way to say that like we can't really talk about the budget of Soul Calibur 7 without saying that it's going to be marginally better, but again, I would temper expectations and not expect it to be ballooned to such an amazing proportion that it's going to be like an entirely blown out different game, like the best Soul Calibur of all time, which I talked about in my last video. We can expect improvements, and hopefully some of those improvements come in the way of gameplay mechanics, such as Reversal Edge being nerfed, as it's like universally hated. I've seen some people that like it, but most people tend to not like that. Critical Edge is being toned down or actually getting taken away from one button presses unless they come up with some kind of simple kind of input structure similar to Street Fighter 6, and they actually have classic dynamic and like, you know, that kind of way, like new. But outside of that, guys, that's all I have to say on that. If you have any questions, please reach out to me in the comment section down below or on my Discord. I did put a fresh new link in the description box, so you should not be getting a timed out message. You should be able just to enter the Discord. Any all thoughts are always welcome. But before we end the video, I want to talk about the poll that I posted on the last video and the results of that poll. The poll stated, do you believe that Season 3 was cancelled, built into 7's base roster, or something else? 36% of people said that it was cancelled, which was number 2. 43%, which is the majority, said that it was built into Soul Calibur 7. 19% said that it was never announced, which is technically the true answer, because they never really announced it. This is just based off of like data breaching and actually like siphoning data from the game. And then other, which was 2%, and you can see the comments on screen now. And if you would like to participate in today's poll, just head on over to the community tab and take a look at today's poll that gets released simultaneous from this video. I want to thank you guys for watching, and thanks for putting up with this long rambling talk. I have to do these talks sometimes. It's not fun, I know, but like to get a better understanding across the board of how these things work. Not many people talk about the background scenes or understand them, but I have like friends that are developers, I have friends that are programmers, voice actors and whatnot, so like I have a little bit of insight behind what goes on artists, I forgot about that, behind what goes on behind the scenes. So if there's any questions that you have that I can answer, I'm allowed to answer, I'll be sure to have a great conversation with you in the comment section down below. Any all thoughts are always welcome, and as I always say, guys, I love it, thank you,
and thank you.